When shy, hard-working student Emily Grace received a once-in-a-lifetime internship in the UK, she thought it was her breakthrough, but she had no idea she was hand-picked to become a human cure for billionaire CEO Ethan Royce. A man unraveling from a slow, deliberate poisoning. What began as opportunity became captivity, and what Ethan discovered about her changed everything. Ethan Royce was a name the world couldn't ignore. A self-made billionaire by 30, he had built a tech empire from his college dorm room and became one of the youngest CEOs in the history of the New York Stock Exchange. But behind the flashing cameras and boardroom brilliance, something darker stirred. A haunting shadow that even he didn't understand. It began one rainy night in London. Ethan had flown in for an exclusive tech summit at the Royal Institute, where world leaders and innovators gathered. The evening was elegant, almost sterile, chilled champagne, silver trays, and smiles sharpened like knives. Somewhere between his third sip of vintage wine and a whispered conversation with a mysterious guest, Ethan collapsed. His vision blurred, his breathing grew shallow. By the time security reached him, he was unresponsive. Doctors called it a stress-induced neurological breakdown. He was flown back to New York, under heavy sedation. The tabloids speculated everything from drug use to secret mental illness, but Ethan remembered the scent of lavender on the woman's dress, the way she had smiled at him just before it all went dark. He remembered how his heart had slowed, not out of fear, but as though something inside him had been taken. The months that followed were hell. Ethan's body survived, but his mind betrayed him. Blackouts, tremors, and sudden violent hallucinations gripped him at random. His genius slipped like sand through fingers. He fired entire departments in paranoid rage. His closest aides left in silence. One morning, he looked in the mirror and saw a version of himself he didn't recognize. Hollow eyes, clenched jaw. Pupils dilated like he was always on the edge of screaming. Nothing worked. Not therapy. Not medicine. Not the best neurologists money could buy. Every night, he lay in bed with his muscles twitching, dreading the cold grip of the next attack. One day he woke up with blood on his hand from clawing his own arm in his sleep. He hadn't felt it. Not the pain, not even the fear. Just numbness. And then, a new psychiatrist whispered something outrageous. What if your mind isn't broken, Mr. Royce? What if it was rewritten by someone who knew how to ruin you without killing you? The idea was absurd, and yet, it felt true. Later, another theory arrived from a hidden corner of the research world, that certain neurological disruptions might stabilize temporarily in the presence of someone with undisturbed neural purity, a person completely untouched by trauma, desire, or corruption. He scoffed at it. This wasn't a novel. He didn't believe in innocence. Not in this world. But as the seizures worsened, his laughter died. He had nothing left but darkness and noise in his mind. So he said yes. Yes to searching for the impossible. And as his staff quietly began the hunt, Ethan sat in the dark of his penthouse suite, fingers shaking around a glass of water he couldn't hold still. Somewhere, deep inside, he feared he was already lost. But a tiny voice whispered, "What if she's real?" Emily Grace had never known the comfort of certainty. Every morning began with the shrill beep of an old alarm clock in a cramped apartment she shared with her parents in the rougher part of Boston. Her room was barely big enough for a single bed and a desk held together by duct tape. Yet, that desk was her world. Stacks of biology textbooks, flashcards, and coffee-stained notebooks testified to her relentless pursuit of something better. Her father, once a steel mill foreman, now sat in silence most days, confined to a wheelchair after a workplace accident left him paralyzed from the waist down. Her mother worked night shifts at 3 different office buildings, cleaning toilets while humming lullabies to hold her sanity together. Emily watched them quietly, absorbing their pain, and promising herself that she would fix it all, somehow. College had been a hard-earned miracle. Scholarships, grants, and hours at the university library, working as a student assistant, helped her barely stay afloat. She had no social life, no parties, no distractions. Her classmates joked about her being a ghost, always around, but never there. She didn't mind. That kind of invisibility protected her. But even ghosts dream. Sometimes, in the quiet after midnight, when the city noises softened and the hum of her desk lamp buzzed in her ears, Emily let herself imagine a different life, a life where she could walk without worry, sleep without stress, and study without the weight of 3 lives on her shoulders, a life where someone cared for her. Then came the email. It was disguised so well: official logos, perfect formatting, glowing words. She read it 3 times before she dared to believe it was real. A prestigious UK medical research institute offering her a full-paid summer internship. Travel, housing, stipend. Her heart stopped. It felt divine, as though her years of exhaustion had finally earned her a chance to breathe. She didn't tell her parents at first. She kept the news inside, guarding it like a candle flame in a storm. But that night, lying awake in her narrow bed, she allowed herself to smile. Not because she was excited, but because for once, she was not drowning. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation: visa documents, new clothes, borrowed from a friend, her first suitcase that didn't have a broken wheel. Her mother cried silently while folding her clothes, slipping a tiny cross into the side pocket. Her father placed a shaking hand on her shoulder the morning she left, pride buried behind the sadness in his eyes. As she sat on the plane, watching the clouds drift by, 1,000 thoughts filled her mind. Maybe this is the turning point, she told herself. Maybe this is where my life begins. She never questioned why the institute had chosen her. A girl with no connections, no glowing letters of recommendation, just perfect grades and a heart full of quiet hope. She should have questioned it. The flight to London felt like a dream Emily wasn't ready to wake from. As the plane cut through clouds and time zones, she sat pressed against the window, watching the Atlantic's endless blue stretch beneath her. She had never left the US before, never even flown. Everything: the flight attendants, the in-flight meal, the glossy magazine in the seat pocket, felt like it belonged to someone else's life, a better one. Still, a strange tightness sat in her chest. She dismissed it as nerves. Who wouldn't be nervous flying across the world alone, stepping into the unknown? She looked around at the other passengers, calm, sleepy, confident. She tried to mimic their ease, but her fingers clutched the edges of her worn travel journal a little too tightly. At Heathrow, the arrival felt almost cinematic. Glass walls shimmered under fluorescent lights, and announcements echoed in crisp British tones. She scanned the crowd for the university representative she was told would be holding a card with her name. There it was, Emily Grace, printed in bold letters, held by a man in a tailored black suit. He didn't smile, but nodded curtly, and took her bag with practiced ease. The drive stretched into the countryside. London's sprawl faded into narrow lanes and stone walls. The university prefers to house its research interns away from the noise, the man said without looking at her. His accent was clipped, his tone robotic. Emily forced a polite smile, though discomfort had begun to knot in her stomach. She glanced at the GPS screen on the dashboard. No university was listed, just a series of coordinates. Her fingers itched to reach for her phone, but it had no signal. Maybe this is normal, she reasoned. Maybe they used private estates for high-level programs. Still, unease crept through her like cold water. They pulled up to an enormous estate, hidden behind iron gates. Old, stone walls covered in ivy towered over her. It didn't feel like a place of science. It felt still, too still. Staff met her at the entrance, smiling, polite, overly rehearsed. They welcomed her like royalty, offering tea, asking about her flight, showing her to a grand room with heavy velvet curtains and books she wasn't allowed to touch. Her bags were unpacked before she had the chance to unzip them herself. That night, as she lay in the 4-poster bed, surrounded by silence and the faint ticking of an antique clock, dread crawled through her spine. Something was wrong. She couldn't name it yet, but she felt it. No other students were around. No schedules, no welcome packet, no mention of research. The next morning, a medical team visited her, under the pretense of routine health assessments. They drew blood, examined her vitals, took notes. She asked questions, but the answers were vague. Each hour chipped away at the illusion she had once clung to. She wasn't at a university, she wasn't an intern, she wasn't free. She had been chosen, but not for what she had believed. The days passed, but time in the estate didn't flow like it did in the outside world. There were no clocks in the hallways, no windows in the rooms they led her to. Every morning began with a knock, followed by a tray of food already placed by the door. No one ever entered without her permission, but she knew they didn't need to. Cameras were everywhere, cleverly disguised in vases, behind wall sconces, even inside the ornate picture frames that decorated the corridor outside her bedroom. Emily felt it, eyes watching her, every moment. At first, she told herself it was just for security, part of some elite research protocol. But as the days blended into a fog of strange routines and shallow pleasantries, the fear began to gnaw at her like a secret she wasn't meant to know. She was given books to read, medical journals, neuroscience papers, behavioral studies, but no real work, no lab, no lectures, no professors, just long walks through manicured gardens with carefully assigned guides who answered questions with polished vagueness. Every question she asked was returned with another question. Why do you want to know that, Miss Grace? Isn't it enough to be safe here? Do you not feel special being chosen? At night, the silence became unbearable. Her room, despite its luxury, felt like a museum exhibit, beautiful but lifeless. She started sleeping with her shoes on, just in case she had to run. Her phone was still useless. Every message she tried to send failed. She told the staff, and they promised to check the signal tower, but nothing changed. Then came the subtle shift. One morning, her tray included unfamiliar pills. She asked what they were. Just supplements, the woman said, smiling with teeth too white, too even. Emily stared at the pills for hours before flushing them down the toilet. That night, the headaches began. She grew dizzy. Light burned her eyes. Her thoughts tangled. Was it her imagination, or had they been drugging her already before the pills? The next day, she faked a fall on the marble stairs. It wasn't dramatic, just enough to demand a moment alone in the medical wing. There, while the nurse left the room to fetch ice, Emily rummaged through the drawers. Hidden beneath files of other patients, she found one with her name. Her photo stared back at her, paper clipped to pages of test results and observations. Psychological profiling, blood analysis, virginity status confirmed. She felt her skin go cold, her knees locked. All the strange tests, the controlled environment, the eerie calm, it wasn't for her benefit. It was for someone else. Later that night, she pressed her ear to the wall and heard footsteps, soft, slow, almost careful. They paused outside her door. She held her breath. They didn't knock, just lingered, and then walked away. Emily didn't know who or what they were preparing her for. But something was coming, and she wasn't ready. The first time Emily saw him, it was as if the air itself changed. He entered the garden through a side gate. Tall, pale, his presence both elegant and unsettling. He didn't speak. He didn't look at her directly. He simply walked past, slow, measured, like someone used to being feared without saying a word. Later she was told his name was Ethan Royce. The billionaire. The man whose name had been on newspapers and television, always linked to fortune, genius, and sudden tragedy. She recognized him from the stories: brilliant, eccentric, reclusive, after a mental collapse, but no headline had prepared her for the strange tension that came with him. She was told not to be afraid. He's fragile, the doctor had said, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. Your presence. It's been helping him. Helping him? She hadn't even spoken to him. Still, she obeyed, because her instincts screamed that disobedience might cost her more than freedom. The next day, they brought her to the sunroom, where he waited. It wasn't a meeting, it was a test. Ethan sat silently in a chair, eyes distant, his hands trembling slightly. The staff said nothing, only gestured for her to sit across from him. No words were exchanged. But as minutes passed, she noticed his hands beginning to still, his breathing slowed. A strange calm spread across his features like a fog lifting from a haunted landscape. Emily stayed frozen, uncertain if she was witnessing healing, or something much more sinister. This strange arrangement continued daily. Sometimes she read while he sat near her. Sometimes they just shared space in silence. The doctors observed, scribbling in notebooks. The staff hovered. But no one ever explained why her presence had this effect. They simply repeated the same phrase over and over. "You're special, Emily." The weight of those words grew heavier with each passing hour. What disturbed her more than the silence was how Ethan began to change. With each visit, his eyes lingered on her longer. He began to watch her, not with gratitude, but with obsession. There was hunger behind his gaze, not physical, not romantic, but something deeper, something disturbed. One day he reached out as she stood to leave. His hand brushed her wrist gently. No pressure, no words, just a touch. But it made her entire body stiffen with panic. That night, she didn't sleep. Her heart beat like a trapped bird in her chest. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the look in his eyes. She was no longer just a guest. No longer just a girl in the wrong place. She was becoming a possession, a treatment, a cure. And he wasn't getting better. He was becoming addicted to her stillness, her silence, her innocence. And the more she gave, the more it seemed he would never let her leave. She began to wonder if Ethan Royce had been broken, or if he had always been this way, and someone had simply given him permission to unravel. Emily began to count days by the light beneath her door. She could no longer tell what time it was, what month it was. Every hour inside the estate drained her like a slow poison. Her world had narrowed to routines of silence and surveillance, and the only freedom she had left was the quiet rebellion inside her thoughts. But rebellion grows in darkness. The headaches had returned, piercing, pulsing pain that felt like something gnawing inside her skull. Her vision blurred at times. She'd wake up drenched in sweat, her throat dry and metallic. They kept telling her she was adjusting, but she wasn't. She was changing, and not by choice. She knew now she was being altered, prepared. One evening, while pretending to nap during her scheduled rest, Emily heard a different sound, an unfamiliar voice outside her door, and a cleaning cart rolling past. The moment the corridor emptied, she leapt from the bed and cracked the door. The cart was there, abandoned, wheels still gently turning. Her heart pounded. She scanned it quickly. Beneath folded towels and cleaning supplies, she spotted something buried deep, a phone. Older model, possibly forgotten, possibly planted. Her hands trembled as she snatched it and shoved it beneath her sweater. She didn't stop to think. Back in her room, she locked the bathroom door, turned the tap on full blast, and powered on the device. To her astonishment, it worked. No pin, no lock. A single contact stored under help. No name, no notes, just a number. With shaking fingers, she dialed. The line rang twice before someone picked up. Static, then a voice. American. Emily, her knees nearly buckled. It was Alex, an old friend from college, someone she hadn't spoken to in months. She whispered details quickly. Location, Ethan, the drugs, the surveillance. Alex didn't ask questions. He only said, "Hold on, I'm going to fix this." The next few days moved like a storm building in the distance. Emily faked symptoms, migraines, nausea, weakness. The staff grew concerned. Doctors adjusted her treatment. But the change gave her something precious. Unsupervised time in the medical wing. She used it. In a locked cabinet, hidden beneath controlled substances, she found it, a file marked ER1 Subject 019. Her name, medical scans, blood reports, psychological evaluations. But something else stood out, communications, emails, authorizations. She wasn't chosen for her grades or genetics. She had been selected because she was easy to isolate. Low financial background, no history of sexual activity, emotionally stable, quiet. She had been profiled, groomed, and lured. And worse, Ethan's condition wasn't a disorder. It had been induced by someone on his executive team. A slow neurological sabotage, masked as mental collapse, designed to strip him of control. He had been poisoned so he could be replaced, and now, she was the pawn keeping him from unraveling entirely. That night, as thunder rolled over the hills and a power outage plunged the estate into blackness, Emily made her move. She used the backup key she had stolen from the nurse's desk. She slipped through the service tunnels, barefoot, heart hammering, vision sharp with fear. No alarms, no voices, just the echo of her breath. She didn't know if she was running from Ethan or toward the truth. Emily didn't look back as she ran through the rain-slick fields beyond the estate walls. The thunder above her seemed to crash in rhythm with her heartbeat, each step sinking into the muddy ground like she was trying to escape quicksand. Her breath tore through her lungs, her nightgown soaked and clinging to her legs. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Freedom wasn't a promise. It was a race against whatever force had turned her life into a silent prison. She reached a rural road just as the first lights of dawn began to push through the storm clouds. A car approached, and she nearly collapsed in front of it, arms waving frantically. The driver, a middle-aged woman delivering newspapers, slammed the brakes and leapt out. When she saw Emily, filthy, barefoot, and trembling, she didn't ask questions. She just helped her in. By the time they reached the nearest town, Emily was already on a call with the American embassy, using a public phone in a gas station bathroom. Her voice shook, but her mind was clear. She told them everything. Names, places, files, the number Alex had traced, the drugs, the manipulation. Within hours, the world that had been so tightly controlled began to crack open. Interpol agents raided the estate that very evening. Reports came flooding in. Hidden laboratories, surveillance servers, dozens of files on other young women. Bank transfers leading back to shell companies owned by Ethan's second-in-command, his longtime partner Charles Martin. The truth unraveled like a sickening thread. Charles had orchestrated Ethan's poisoning 2 years earlier, slipping synthetic neurotoxins into his food over months. He had known that Ethan's empire could not be seized legally. Instead, he would break the man piece by piece, until he was mentally incompetent. But something had gone wrong. The toxin had triggered an unstable neurological response that no one had predicted. Ethan hadn't just grown weak, he'd begun to lose his mind in terrifying ways. That's when doctors paid, not trusted, introduced the theory of purity therapy, and Charles seized it. If someone innocent, untouched, and emotionally neutral could balance Ethan's disintegrating mind, it would buy him more time to take control of the company while keeping the CEO alive, barely functional, but alive. Emily had become the crutch between madness and power. When the estate was stormed, Ethan was already gone. Some believed he had been tipped off. Others thought Charles had tried to silence him. But one camera captured him slipping through the woods alone in the early hours, long before the raid began. No guards, no staff, no shoes. Just him, moving like a ghost into the wilderness. Emily returned to the U.S. a week later. The media swarmed her, but she never spoke. She declined interviews, turned down money. She enrolled quietly in a new school under a different name. Months later, a donation was made anonymously to her father's rehabilitation clinic, enough to cover years of care. The sender listed no return address, only the name E. Roy. Somewhere in the shadows, the man who once saw her as a cure now lived as a curse. And Emily, though free, would never forget the price of being chosen.